Okay, Proverbs chapter 1. I'm going to read several verses from the first 4 chapters of Proverbs. Chapter 1, verse 10. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Verse 15. My son, walk not thou in the way with them, refrain thy foot from their path. Verse 17. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. Let me pause to talk about those. First, I'm dealing with the principle of conflict. These opening words in the book of Proverbs are the instruction of a parent to a child. We're dealing tonight with how to teach your children about sex. The Bible and sexual relationships. Tonight, how to teach your children about sex. A week ago tonight, we did with the Bible basis of healthy, fulfilling sex. Last Sunday night, sex snares that rip heart and homes. Tonight, how to teach your children about sex. These opening verses, just selections from these, speak about the conflict that every one of us need to counsel our children concerning. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. There is a specific conflict for your child's mind. They are not just sexual beings that are growing into the awareness of their sexuality. They are facing a present enticement of sin around them. Verse 15. Walk not in the way of them, refrain thy foot from their path. Verse 17, surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. That obviously says if the bird sees you laying the trap, he's not going to get caught. He knows what you're doing. And essentially what that's saying is if you will teach your child in advance the traps, show them the net in advance, they're never going to get caught in it. They will never get caught in it if you talk about it in advance. Let's go to chapter 2, verse 1. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, verse 9, then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path. Continuing 10, when wisdom enters into your heart and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh forward things. The thing that most stands out here to my mind is the contrast that is shown if any kind of teaching between our lives and the world's system is taught to the child right. They learn that the path you're showing them, look at here in verse 9, is righteousness, judgment, equity, and every good path. Righteousness has to do with the right way for things to be. Judgment has to do with the essence of keeping unbound freedom. Judgment is not training a kid to go around pointing the finger at everything evil and saying, that's terrible, but where they stay freed. The essence of judgment is freedom and deliverance. When a judgment is made by a judge, what essentially takes place is the law works in the benefit of the individual. When judgment is happening in the life of a believer, it's because they've been taught the word in such a way that it works in their benefit. The word works for their benefit. The law of God is beneficial. The law of God is not made to them some formidable obstacle. It is not made a pointing finger of criticism at their lives. It is something that becomes good and pleasant to them. And equity, of course, has balance. If they understand balance, it's how everything fits together. It's not just being told one side of the picture. They're told how things fit together, and that makes a good path. Then wisdom enters into their soul, and verse 11 says, and discretion or appropriate judgment preserves them to deliver them from the way of the evil man. Now, the thing that strikes me is the contrast between the evil man, look at here, from the evil in verse 12, and up here in verse 9, when you understand every good path and the evil way, the way of the evil man. The contrast they need to see, and the contrast essentially is not that's bad and this is good, but that doesn't work and it destroys, and this works and it is fulfilling. And so many times the teaching on any area of righteousness that it characterizes believers dealing with their children is a set of no-nos and negatives that all the kid understands is, you're not supposed to do that. And when any inclination toward temptation comes, they've never been given any reason. They've just been given direction. And training a child involves introducing reasons so that they understand the ideas behind what's being said. And they see the contrast They don't just see a commandment. The commandment is given so that you might preserve the good in your life and the joy and the prospect of fulfillment as opposed to what is destructive. Conflict and contrast. They're in the middle of a setting that there is a battle for their souls. It is not just your kids growing up. There is a battle. There is an enticement of an evil realm around them, both spiritual and human, and then there's a contrast. And when they begin to understand that that contrast is a summons to live a life that is not just being a goodie, but living a life that becomes good. And they understand the difference in that and simply being some kind of a religious prude or snob, because I don't understand why anybody'd want to be that. And parents make the difference, how they train their kids. I have very great difficulty with the idea of a parent who just issues orders to their kids and doesn't teach them the reason behind what they're talking about, where their concept comes in to the child. Chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them upon thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart, and so shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. I want you to notice that last phrase, the last verse. They found favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. This is the content of the life of Jesus. Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. Favor with God and man. The content of a life where a child is taught by a parent. My son, the parent teaches the child. The content becomes favor with God and man. That it becomes something that's wholesome and desirable in their lives. They are not ostracized really from the world system. The amazing thing about a child, a young person that is a child and then a young person that is raised in wisdom, according to the Word, there comes something about their lives that the people around them may not live in that blessing and that quality of righteousness, but they become marked by the world as they're basically right. It's good. Some of you have grown up in the way of the Lord, and you've had the same experience that I did. There are many ways socially that I was rejected in my teenage years, not by, of course, brothers and sisters in Jesus. There was always a circle of kids that I enjoyed companionship with, but so many times on campus, irrespective of what, the only thing why I survived to some degree socially in my high school and junior high years was because of athletic ability, and if you were athletic, well, at least you couldn't be completely square. But there were kids that loved the Lord like I did, and they were totally out of it because they didn't have any particular gifts that were respected in the school community. And really those gifts are so limited, it's dress, how you dress. If you really are either goofy or especially if you're a goof or if you're willing to just fling any standard to the winds. There's very few places where there's any tribute for being just plain smart or committed to any kind of a standard, especially in junior high. It's tough times for junior highs. Values change a little bit in high school in some quarters, but that is really a tough time, and my heart goes out to those kids, and I love them very much. But the favor with God and man, the Scripture says there comes a time where the people around you, when the chips are down and they've got their back against the wall, that no matter how they viewed you or acted toward you when you were considered out of it by their judgment, when they really face a need, they know exactly where to go. It's the evidence of favor with God and man. And a child that is trained that way, they'll begin to see the fruitfulness of that, because while the world system rejects them, it still will acknowledge them in its time of crisis. And a child can be introduced to that sense of the content there is in serving and being trained right in the way of the Lord. And of course, this so obviously relates to anything you teach the child, but we're talking specifically tonight about sex. I'm just taking these parent-child teaching situations, though, and the principles that are involved: the principle of conflict, principle of contrast, the principle of content that is introduced to the child's life. And then finally, chapter 4, 1 to 4, and I'll elaborate these in some practical illustrations in a moment. I just want to lay down a simple Bible base for the practical instruction I'm giving tonight. Hear ye, children, and the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding, for I give you good teaching or doctrine. Forsake not my law or my instructions. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. And he taught me also, said unto me, let thine heart retain my words, keep my commandments, and live. Here's a picture of a family from one generation to another, breeding a way of life that becomes respected within the family circle. Desirable to live the way the family does. The family says, this is the way we are. And it becomes something the child wants to be a part of, and there's a constancy in the family. Now, that is not something that may be the case with your family. At the end, I'm going to talk about if it's not. But it is the goal. For those of you that are beginning or haven't yet begun families or are early in the shaping of your family. Some are way down the pike and it's way too late. But there are some who you'll see things that will help dissect some of the bondage in your life. When you see things that were violated, you can work your way back and say, well, Lord, at least in my own heart and life, then help me to get the pieces put back together. These four things, the parent teaching the child, every one of these statements begins a parent talking to a child, my son, my child. It deals with the fact you're dealing with a conflict, not just with a growing child. There is a spiritual conflict. You teach them that are dealing with sinners and with impending bondage that comes at a spiritual nature. They're taught the contrast of the good life that comes through the Word of God as opposed to the destruction in the way of evil. It's not just the contrast of you better be good instead of bad. It's the contrast of fruitfulness that comes because you come to know the way of the Lord, the fulfillment that's wrapped up in that. The principle of content. The content of this kind of life is you gain favor with God and man. And it's an abiding kind of content. It's not something that dissipates because somebody doesn't particularly accept you right now, but in the long haul, they'll say there was a person that had it. Illustrations come to mind. You know, I got a letter just about 6 months ago from a guy I went to high school with. I've not heard from him all these years. He saw me on television, wrote me a note. And it's interesting what happens to people's attitudes. You know, there's some, most of the young people are tuned in via television tonight in different areas of the church property. The high schoolers and the junior highs are joining us too tonight, I think, both groups are. I know the high schoolers are. And there's, at your age bracket right now, so many times it just seems like everything determines, you know, the joy of your life determines what happens by this Friday. And I don't really say that mockingly toward you at all. I understand life seems, you know, so important what happens right now. And I'm not minimizing your desire to see things happen right now, but I want to emphasize that the wisdom of God's Word says that if you just listen to the Lord's way, it's going to be a good way for you now. And the beauty of it is that the content it builds in you lasts for a long time, and the day's going to come when people that don't really think that you're all so special right now because you don't groove and tool with them, that they're going to come around one day and say, you know, you really had it together and I wish I hadn't messed me up. Then the constancy, the family style life. I want to talk quite a bit about that in a little bit, so let's get on. I want to talk about 5 areas of problem now tonight in teaching your child about sex. These categories, I'll be repeating them, so if you're writing down, you don't need to get them all right now. The first area of problem when questions arise, when the child begins to discover himself physically. I want to talk about teaching the child at that point, when they begin to discover themselves physically. Secondly, when the words or actions of other children present questions or problems. Moving into an area they're 3, 4, 5 years old. It extends later through grammar school. But first dealings, how those early stages are dealt with. The words or the actions of other children when they're 3, 4, 5 years old, the earliest playmates. Child begins to discover himself just as a little baby in the bathtub. And you're looking at when they're old enough to sit up and be alone by themselves for even a few minutes in the tub. And that's the earliest discoveries. Then the words and actions, we move into a little later years. The next thing is, thirdly, when questions come regarding sex and reproduction. And there's no predictable time as to when or how those questions will come. And but they will come. And usually it's best if something's been said that anticipates it. I'll talk a good deal about that in a moment. Fourthly, when media exposure, television or films, when media exposure presents questions or undesirable input. And when I say undesirable input, I presume that you're careful enough. This is really an unfounded presumption because I don't think that by any means even all believing parents are careful about this. Probably some of you hearing me right now that you're sloppy about this. I doubt that it's the majority, but there's some of you are just shoddy in this area or have been, and that's monitoring what your kids are watching on TV. But even if you're monitoring and careful, There's still things just flash out, suddenly happen that you were totally unprepared for. How you handle those situations is a part of the teaching process, teaching your child about sex. Fifthly, when puberty approaches and concerns about those changes begin. Now those are the major areas of problem I want to deal with. I'll take them in their turn. I'm going to move very rapidly in order that we can stay pretty tight in our schedule tonight, okay? Number one, when the child begins to discover himself or herself physically. The earliest points of discovery, playing in the bathtub, or actions you'll observe when they're maybe playing, or a child, if I can't think of another way than just a simple way to say it, that the child is fingering themselves or scratching or rubbing themselves. And it can be, in fact, it is, just virtually always innocent. A tiny little child is not really having sex thoughts or any kind of fantasies. At most, they're doing something that has a mildly pleasurable feeling. I'm not being the least bit funny when I say don't make the mistake, of supposing this is some kind of an obscene sex act or that they're just on the verge of something climactic. But you're dealing with a child that is not, with a physical being that is not highly geared sexually. There may be a mildly pleasurable feeling that they're experiencing. And so what you're dealing with is just stopping something, and I'm going to emphasize that point in a moment. You will read handbooks in the world that just say, well, don't really worry about it. They'll say don't worry about it on the premises of that I just spoke. The premises being that they're not all that sexually geared anyway, and it doesn't make any difference if it's part of the world system. If it feels good, do it, even if you're 18 months old or 2 years old. That's not right. That's not right. But at the same time, we need to know that we're not dealing with some kind of a red-hot sex item. We're dealing with a little kid who's curious and feeling feelings. So how do you deal with that situation? Response. Let me talk about that. When you see any of the things that I mentioned, a little boy who's in the bathtub becomes fascinated with himself, and that tiny little body has an erection in the bathtub. It certainly doesn't mean very much, except if there's not some kind of guidance given from the earliest inception of those situations. Well, you are going to, in the long term, breed a problem. So how do you handle it? Make these notes if you wish. First, don't be shocked. Don't be shocked. Don't create nervousness or tension. When your child is doing something as a tiny little infant, I'm not talking about a 6 or 8 year old, I'm talking about a virtual infant. When there's any one of the expressions that I mentioned, either a little boy or a little girl in any way, don't be shocked, don't lift your voice, just talk very, very naturally. Supposing that you stepped out of the bathroom for just a moment, they were bathing and you stepped out maybe to answer the phone and you came back and they're handling themselves. To lift your voice in shock or dismay or to register, all it does is breed a fear. They're not going to think. A tiny little child won't think, aha, since that's the way they think about this, then I'm going to do it more. What it will do is it creates fears surrounding their sexuality. So just a very, very natural response. And let me suggest an approach, and this is, for this evening, I conversed with Anna over all these things just to review of what I had remembered of how we've dealt with our children and taught before, if that was right, and had a really good conversation just remembering the things that have happened over the years with our own kids. And these things are things we know that work, but they work on certain premises that I want to lay down in a few moments. When it occurs, what you say is of crucial importance, but how you say it's even more so. Oh, Johnny, don't do that. Don't do that. Now, what are you going to say? Don't do that. Why? We have bypassed, not saying, oh, stop that. Not doing that. Son, don't do that. Give a reason. Son, the reason that I don't want you to do that, honey, the reason I don't want you to do that is because that's really a very important part of our bodies. You can hurt it. you can hurt your body and want you to be careful, because that's the boy part of you, talking to a 2.5-year-old, maybe a 3-year-old. 1.5-year-old, just say, don't do that, and don't say anything else. Just say, here, let's wash your foot now, and just get their attention. You don't need to give any instructions. And the simplest guidelines and distraction will get them away from that. However, when you naturally draw attention away from that to another part of the body, you open up an area of great concern. What I said doesn't work if what I said in the first 5 sessions of this whole series isn't a part of your life. If when you say to your child, don't touch that, it has to do with a little ceramic on a shelf that's just hand-high to a 2-year-old, and they don't obey that, then they won't obey when you say, don't do that. See, we're dealing with far greater issues now than just sex education. We're talking about how your child responds when you say don't. And you've trained, developed them to where they take your word for that, and that's all there is to it. And it doesn't require extended explanation, it doesn't require any kind of punishment, it just requires their learning to respond when you say something. Now, that learning to respond, of course, as I said, that kind of response that I said is predicated upon other things that are functioning in the life, in the relationship all the time. Don't be afraid to be firm if you need to, but don't be frightened yourself, and don't kind of come on with authority kick because you're afraid that your child is going to suddenly become some kind of pervert because at the age of 2 years old they were handling themselves in the bathtub. But you do need to recognize that it's important, and that you deal with that. Now, that you deal with that in a very natural way, an unshocked way, and that you have something to say that is appropriate to their age. I made a vast difference between what you may say to an 18-month-old and what you'd say to a 30-month-old. It's a lot of difference. And you've got to think about what you're going to say to your children at different times and what seems to be meaningful to them, and how much explanation at any time is necessary for them. But when our kids were very, very small, I can remember distinctly at some time or another, and you can say, oh, don't do that. It's kind of, that's really, that'll hurt you, son. And that's a very, very precious part of our body. And we'll talk about that some other time, but that's the boy part of you. And so we just need to be careful because the Lord wants us to. That's all. It's all, no big deal. They'll obey because a pattern of obedience has been established. And you've also, very, very important, laid the groundwork for another time of teaching sometime. They recognize a preciousness, beginning a tiny little introduction of a reverence for their body, and the introduction of a recognition of their identity is tied to that part of their body, a recognition that it's something that has to do with God. But it is not issuing some heavy commandment. It's just simply that special part of you, it's got to do with who you are, and it's the Lord's made us that way. And it's all in a comfortable and pleasant setting. And you don't handle that part of your body carelessly because you can hurt it. You say, well, Jack, how can they hurt it? Are you being honest with your child saying they can hurt it? Absolutely. Absolutely, I'm being honest. You say, well, physiologists, doctors, everybody, they say that you can't really hurt yourself that much. But see, you need to decide if that part of their body is only a piece of the physical anatomy, or if that part of their body is tied to a part of their personality, and to mess around holds the possibility of breaking another part of their being. And the answer to that is yes. And so it's not a matter of dishonesty of saying you can hurt yourself. It's not just a matter of injuring. They're probably not going to injure their body. I suppose a child could play with themselves until they get into high school and graduate and get married and masturbate through their whole marriage and not ruin the function of the equipment. But you're going to have a messed up personality. And that's not a matter of some of the superstitions of the past. You're talking to a pastor that's counseled too many people that have ruined their own capacities for healthy, fulfilling relationship in their sex life and in their own perspective on themselves. by that. And it reaches back to how wisely and discretionately this kind of situation is handled. Number 2, words or actions of other children. Don't wait until the first time that you go out in the garage and one of the little kids next door are there and they've all both got their pants down and they're staring at each other and talking about the difference, you know. I suppose that if you wait until the situation arises, it's going to be a lot more difficult than if sometime when kids start regularly being out and playing with other kids where they're not under close supervision, and there's times they're outdoors for an hour or two with other kids, sometime casually mention this to them. Remember one of the times I told you we need to be careful with the special parts of our bodies, our boy parts and girl parts? You know, one of these days, you know, you're going out and you're playing a lot now with other kids in the neighborhood, and one of these days, maybe it'll never happen, but probably one of these days, some other kid is going to say, let's take our pants down. Or they're going to say something about your body. Every family, this is kind of funny. It'd be interesting to have people write down what are the terms, the family terms used for the body parts. You know, some of the funniest stories I've ever heard are terms that are used in the family for the sex organs. And I really think, you know, we had no disposition in our family, and I would never tell you the term that evolved with our kids. We had no disposition to use anything else than the official terms. You know, it wasn't, but a funny thing happened with our first child, and I wouldn't embarrass her or our family by telling you what occurred, but really from her own lips came the term that we just kind of adopted for years in our family, and it really is silly, but it just became the family word for your either penis or vagina. And whatever term you use in your family, say, you can, and by the way, I'm not encouraging adoption of clever little terms. I'm just, this happened so naturally, it just sort of was adopted because it was, as a matter of fact, now that I think about it, it's a good illustration of just letting a very natural kind of communication happen. Since the child coined a word almost inadvertently, in fact, it certainly was inadvertently. They didn't sit around thinking, what shall I call this part of my body, you know? Just as a very natural response, by the way, I might say that way before that she got married, we explained to her there was another word. You know. Way before there ever comes a crisis with other kids, they'll tell them that sometimes some other kid is going to say they're going to want to talk about your body. They're going to want to, they may suggest that you show them yourself, or that you touch each other, or they'll want to hide, say let's show each other to one another. And I'm talking about now 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. I'll say, now, honey, when that happens, let's understand right now that's something that we really don't do, because that's a private part of us. And it's not anything we need to be afraid of or ashamed of, but we don't show that part of us. And so whenever that happens, you just say no. And I'll tell you something else you do. You don't feel afraid to say, because we won't think you did anything bad, but you tell Mama or Daddy about that. You tell them that it happened. And that has happened with our kids. They do that. Now, that presupposes another thing, that the family lives in a continuous relationship of love and trust, that the child knows that if they come telling something that is potentially bad, that they won't be embarrassed in front of their friends because the parents come storming out raising all kinds of Cain, that the child is going to be trusted for having come and spoken what they did, that there's an atmosphere of love and trust that is established so that they are free to do that. And that's exactly what our kids have done. I'm thinking, for example, one of the kids, one day they were playing with a little kid that all the child did was go over and just, it was about 4 or 5 years old, kind of semi-open out, and it was in the front yard, Kid went over and just squatted over to the side and urinated. And the little kid was playing with him, just came in and said, so-and-so just took her pants down and went potty out in the yard. And you told me if anything ever like that happened to come and tell you. Well, we in fact had never thought of saying if one of your friends go potty in the yard, you come. But they recognized that that was something, and it was just the simplest thing to deal with. Well, in fact, we not only were gratified at the child's response, we talked to the little kid they were playing with in just a nice way. Said, you know, you don't do that. We don't want you to feel that we're mad at you. We talked to him nice, and it helped. Matter of fact, there's a great deal that might be said about that whole episode, because I think that over the years a lot more has happened by reason of that particular relationship than there'd even be time to tell. But it became an opportunity for influence and just a very simple manifestation of right or righteousness, but not self-righteousness and prudery. So set up in advance. You know, if anything like this happens, then you talk to us. But don't say, if anything like that ever happens, I want you to be sure you come and talk to me. The kid just thinks, Lord, what is that? What happens when it I don't know. But if you just say, you know, one of these times something like this is going to happen, what you've said is that we don't live that way. Another thing is foundational here. You're dealing with the breeding of a sense of family, a continuity of the way the family lives. Just like this passage in Proverbs. My children, hear the instruction of a father, for verse 3, for I was my father's son. Saying this is the way we live. I don't know how many of you have heard me tell this story. I guess probably not many. It was years ago. I can't remember telling it the last 4 or 5 years. I told it 2 or 3 times maybe over all the years here at the church. About the time that I talked with the kids about that your name is Hayford and we don't live that way. We just talked about we're different. We're different. Didn't say we're better than anybody. We're just different. We live the way we live. But the principal thing we are beside Hayford is we love Jesus. We belong to Jesus, and this is the way we live. And you help the child understand what I said earlier, the contrast. There is another way. There is another way. Say, well, why will they choose the family's way instead of the other way? Because of the love? Because of the acceptance? Because they look around as the kids grow older, the farther they go and they see what they've got in their home and their family, there's no reason to do things the way the world does. The world is a mess. They see very, very few happy families. I'll never forget the day that our oldest daughter came to us just weeping, and she says, Mom and Dad, she says, just the other day, I think she's a senior in high school, she said, just the other day I was listening to kids in a class they had at school talk about the way things happen in their home at some kind of sociology class. And she said, you know, I didn't really realize until all of a sudden it dawned on me how much I really have just in our home. I really want to thank you for it. It was a very precious and touching thing to us. But that is a thing that's built over years, where the reason they choose to do right isn't because you issued right orders alone. It's because there's an atmosphere that entertains the desire to be right, to live right. And it's the Lord's way. So you prepare them in advance for the possibility of other manifestations. Now, you tell them also, you'll hear bad words sometimes. Whenever you hear a word that it sounds bad the way they say it, or you don't know what it means, you come and we'll talk about it, okay? And, you know, it's a funny thing to have a kid walk into your house. Hey, Daddy, what is bloop in Israel? They rip off with some 4-letter number. You know, just this innocent little kid say, what is... Well, most of the words that they're going to hear that they don't know are words that relate to sex. And so it is a setup for saying something about sex. And so usually say, well, honey, what that is a word that's used for when a man and a woman, a mom and a daddy they're married and they love each other, that when they're together, but it's a dirty word. And it's a dirty word because the devil likes to make good things dirty. And one of the ways he does that is try and get people to get together and be like a husband and wife when they're not a husband and wife. And sometimes there's a case you can refer to if you're dealing with a 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. a case that you might use for an illustration if it seems appropriate. Maybe this wouldn't be the illustration. But honey, we shouldn't think bad of them. But you remember when you named the little boys Mama and Daddy got a divorce a while back? The reason that they don't live together anymore is because that's what happened. And you shouldn't think bad of them for that, but that's the kind of thing that happens. And the child begins to learn that the issues of just the words that are spoken around them, the things that they hear about, that again, they are in a different realm. They live in that world, but they're more and more learning a little at a time that they do not relate to it at that dimension of its impurity and irreverence for sexual matters. Incidents when kids are playing. The Bible says a child left to himself brings his parents to shame. A child left to himself brings his parents to shame. One of the things that I think everybody's seen, I don't know what you've done about it, we felt is very, very important. And that's when the kids are playing. Let's say you've got 3 or 4 little kids playing together in the room or outside, and they just start getting silly. And I mean, you can hear the giggly, not just laughter at something funny that happened. Laughter at something funny that happened laughs for a matter of seconds, then it's over and the kids are happy and playing. But where there just gets a giddy silliness. Now, when there comes this absolute silliness, and they're just shrieking and howling and being just that. It's the only word I know for it is silly. Not kids playing a funny game. I'm just sitting and getting dumb. It is wise to just go and say, hey kids, just don't be silly. Have a good time, but just you're getting goofy. Now stop it. Now, the reason is because things start happening in that situation, and there is a spirit of levity. There is such a thing. And when that silliness begins to happen, you find the kids start wanting to any kind of imaginations begin to enter in. There's kids that'll start saying, let's start tickling each other just so we can giggle some more. But the problem is the tickling then gets close to, well, the fact of the matter is a little child, and very, very commonly the tickling is arousing sexually. Even without touching the genitals can be arousing sexually when that silliness comes. I'm not saying don't tickle your kids. I'm talking about when the kids this silliness comes and it gets on ad infinitum. The kids will say, let's close the doors. Let's turn the lights off. This is not at the age bracket I'm talking about right now, but our junior high kid came in the other night, and she and some of the neighborhood kids were out swimming in the pool, and they're all good kids. There's nothing wrong with them. But they'd been swimming out there for about 45 minutes, and so she came in and she said, are we allowed to turn the light out while we're swimming? And it was about 9 o'clock at night. It was a Friday night, and the kids were playing late and swimming. I think it was probably 9:30. And are we allowed to do that? And I said, well, why do you want to turn the light? Well, one of the kids said, let's turn the light out. And she, in fact, said, I didn't really feel we should, but I didn't even know if we were allowed to. I said, well, I'll tell you what. As a matter of fact, it was 10 to 10. I remember that very clearly now because I said, I'll tell you what, no, don't turn the light out, but you guys just decide. It says, you can swim till 10. We'll call it quits. Now, that was a good, unshocked way to handle it was over, but I'll tell you what was going on with those kids. Bunch of junior high kids, they're getting silly. There's nothing bad about any of those kids. But there was a kind of a silliness coming. What do they want the lights out for? Say, well, you're just suspicious. No, I'm very, very practical. Very practical. And it's just a matter of heading things off at the pass. But this all has to do, and now back to the little child, there is a time where you just need to say, stop that. And the words or actions of the child, stop it. Now, in this conjunction, I want to underscore something that I believe you can teach a child early in their life. And you teach them to stop it, but not just to stop it when you say stop it. I don't believe, you take the kids that are out goofing around in the swimming pool, And so one of them thinks it'd be kind of fun to have the light out. Every person listening to my voice right now, you know the times in your life. You can go back to when you were a little kid. I remember one time when I was 5 years old, and we had the idea, I'm not saying this to be funny, I could tell it and it'd be silly and funny, but I can remember that we thought that we lived on a busy street and kids were out, we were playing on the front lawn. We thought, well, you know what we could do? If we could just play around, we'll slide over from time to time when somebody come by, and we'll just be playing a game where we slide over toward the sidewalk. And if you get close enough, maybe you can see up the skirts of the ladies walking by. I can remember that very clearly. And you know why I remember it so well? It's not because we saw anything. How great an angle you're going to get with your head on the lawn and the person 4 feet over the side. The reason I remember it so well is because I remember the twinge in my conscience when I thought of doing that. And every person listening to my voice knows exactly what I'm talking about. No one is devoid of those inner signals that say you are doing something that is not right. You weren't even necessarily taught it. And they know it. And you can train a child to learn to acknowledge those. Honey, you know, the reason I stopped you when you were getting Cecily there in the other room, in fact, there's times we just walked in and say, kids, no big deal. Kids, we're just going to stop. You guys go on home now. Kids, go on home. So you can come back and play later on today. After the kids go, say, honey, I want to ask you something. Did you understand how silly everything was getting there? And yeah, and I said, do you really know what I'm talking about? Yeah. I said, I want to ask you something. Sometimes when things get silly like that, is there anything in you that feels like this is too silly? Our experience, at least, is that they recognize that. Not because they figure they've got to say yes to be agreeable, because there's a relationship established that they know that if they don't understand what you're talking about, all they need to do is say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But they do. Say, well, honey, when those kind of little empty, hollow feelings come, you know that's not right, then you need to learn, you be the person that stops it. You say, kids, hey, let's do something else. I said, you don't need to stand up and say, this is wrong. You just say, let's do something else. So they learn how to be righteous without being prudish. But they learn to recognize those inner signals themselves. And it's something you teach them to recognize. So that when they face the words and actions of other children in those early years of their life, they begin to learn to monitor their own heart, their own conscience, and respond. Am I telling this good, honey? You think I'm doing okay? Okay. We talked about this earlier, and she said that I was telling the truth, and she just said I did well, so it's okay. How many were here last week? Okay, the third one, questions. Questions regarding sex and reproduction. Questions regarding sex and reproduction. Now, you've already begun in response to small challenges. This is a very important part of you, the boy part and the girl part. So we can be mamas and daddies some days. That's another point. There comes a time where you say, that has to do with so you can be mamas and daddies someday. They understand that. Sometimes a child's question about their navel. So that's where you were attached to mama. You're little, when you were inside mama. And we live in a really open society today, even, and I'm talking about in the pure and proper sense of open, not in the distortions and the evil that's been exaggerated in so-called openness. But so it's not difficult to talk about it, and they see pregnant women, say, well, they're going to have a baby, and the baby's inside them. They don't need to understand how the baby began to be formed, how conception takes place yet. They wouldn't even understand what you were talking about. You could go through all the explanation in the world, but it wouldn't make sense. It just becomes a factual information, and the facts aren't going to do them any service until the time comes where they begin to ask questions. Now, when is that time? When is the time? Very real and important question. Anna and I are persuaded, and I know other parents of the same persuasion, that if you pray, the Lord will give you a natural time to talk to your child. It will rise. There's not a time you decide when they get to be such and such an age, I'll talk to them. Our experience with our children is that it does not come in one conversation. It usually takes about 3 times. I would say the first major conversation is somewhere around the time they're 4 or 5 years old. There'll be another one around the 2 or 3 years later, and be another one as they come to puberty. I would talk to them before they enter puberty. But as the questions that come, there's a building. Let it. You don't need to wait until there comes, well, they're 9 years old, so now we're going to have our talk about the birds and the bees. Heard a story sometime back, by the way, about a mother who was she just couldn't bring herself to talk to her children about sexual matters. So she said to the teenager, she said, I want to, do you know, she said, about the birds and the bees? And she'd never taught her own son, and he said, yes. She said, well, would you tell Robbie? You know, he was 8 years old. Would you tell Robbie? So the teenage boy went to Robbie. He says, Robbie, do you know how men and women have babies? Robbie said, yeah. He said, well, Mom wanted to tell you it's the same with the birds and the bees. Our experience is if you'll ask the Holy Spirit to set up times, there will be a natural development, and you'll know when it's appropriate to talk to them. I'll say more about that in just a moment. But one thing that I am very, very thankful for, and I've recommended a number of times, and that's a series, and this is an excellent point of reference, and you can use it with your children. There's a series of books that are published by the Lutherans, the Missouri Synod Lutherans, Concordia Sex Series. Set of books. This is designed for children grades about age 5. Matter of fact, I've got the list here exactly what age. Yeah, ages 5 to 9. And it's a beautiful story with pictures, and about only as graphic as would be necessary. But it in fact does show the different sex organs between the boy and the girl. And the way it's done is that Mama in the story has twins, and when she brings them home, well, the little kids help take care of them and are there when they bathe and so forth, and so they talk about it. It's done so beautifully about how the babies were formed inside Mama and so forth. It's very tasteful and very thorough at the age level that child needs. Then the next age bracket, wonderfully made, is ages 10 to 12, and it's far more graphic and far more detailed. The significance of this series, of course, is illustrative, in my mind, of the point I've just made, that there's a natural progression of the child. There's the next book, Take the High Road, is for junior highs, and Life Can Be Sexual is for high schoolers. And there's also a book for Parents' Guide to Christian Conversation about sex, how to talk to your kids about sex. And this is all written from a very biblical and conservative point of view, and it's done tastefully and it's done thoroughly. Whenever we talk about this, I tell them in advance in the book room, but they never can have enough in supply. And so usually what we suggest you do if you're interested is you can go to the book room and place the order. So long as they have any in stock, and get them, and they can probably get delivery in just a few days, so you'd have them shortly for any age bracket. We've used those all with our kids. When you get to the junior high and high school level, we give them to them and they read them themselves, and then we talk about them, and I'll come to that when we talk about puberty in just a moment. When you use these materials, as a matter of fact, Anna had spoken with our youngest girl sometime back, about 2 years ago or so. She just turned 13, so maybe it was 2.5 years ago. She talked to her because it was 2 years ago was the last conversation, which was the last conversation we think of usually in about 3 steps, and that's the conversation that covers the everything they really need to know. And after that, after the fact, not before, we gave her the book and said, you read this and see if this jives with everything that you've had told, and if there's anything you don't understand, well, then you and Mama can talk about it. I talked to her about the book. I didn't go through it with her. I talked to her about it. I said, now, honey, all the changes that are going to be happening to you pretty soon, this will help you to know about this. And then Anna had already spoken with her, so I said, I know Mama talked with you. So you read this, and then you can talk to Mama about it. I said, I'm not saying don't talk to me, because I would be embarrassed to talk to you about it, but I think maybe you'll feel more comfortable talking with Mama, but if there's anything you want to talk to me about, you can too. So again, it's just very natural, but then it gives them a point of you're not depending on just what you told them, but there's a way for them to firm up and see if they really understood it by reading the way that it's been written in a tasteful and gracious way. I've done 3 of the 5 problems. I guess what I'm going to have to do is have another session because I've got 2 more to go and I don't want to race through them. So what we'll do is put a comma there, and I'll decide when the session will be. It'll be soon. I apologize. I feel that you probably knew that would happen when you came tonight. Let me say before we conclude, and by the way, you can be preparing your tithes and offerings, the brethren are coming. Let me say before we conclude that inevitably the question comes, well, what if it's too late, Jack? You're talking about training the child. We're way down the line and we haven't done these things. In fact, we just got saved 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago, and we haven't done this. What do? I want to deal with that when I do the rest of this at length. But let me say the beginning 2 points. The first thing you do is confess to God. You go and say, Lord, I'm not going to try and justify myself. I just haven't done right. I didn't know right. So I already confessed my sins to God. Confess this. Say, Lord, I really need your help to redeem a situation that God just wasn't taken care of as well as it needs to be. Secondly, confess to your child. The child that's too far along now where something's messed up. I'm not talking about confess to your 2-year-old. I'm talking about confess to your 12-year-old. Sit down with them and say, honey, you know, I really should have helped you a lot more. And I think there's some things that probably you don't understand very well. I could have explained better to you, but I've asked the Lord to forgive me. And I want to tell you that I don't know how to get it straightened out, but I do believe there's things that aren't as clear in your mind as they really need to be. And I don't just mean about how sex works. I mean about values. See, the main thing I want to deal with on the next point has to do with media exposure. Everybody today is bombarded through the media. Your kids and my kids are bombarded with every kind of sexual hellishness. I don't mean porno flicks on the Z channel. I mean it's just crawling at them from every direction. And you do not just teach them, well, that's bad. They are constantly dealing with a conceptual and with an educational process of concepts in their mind. The thing that concerns me more than anything right now, if it's so that I'm talking to junior highs, I'm going to tell you one thing that bothers me about the junior highs and high schoolers, and not them, some of you that are sitting here in the sanctuary in the overflow areas of adults, but especially so many junior highs and high schoolers, they are not taught to think. And your pastor isn't saying that lovelessly to you, kiddo. But somebody can say, no, you shouldn't do that. Somebody can talk to you about why the jeans commercials are crummy. But you can groove on to and just say, oh, I just think Brooke Shields is so neat. I'm going to tell you something that I think. I think Brooke Shields is neat too. I pray for her, in fact, quite often. I think there's a lot of very neat people that are being used and being wiped out. And when they have the kind of influence that some do in the media community, then they become not only people that are wiped out themselves, they become wiped out. You see, junior high, you can't tell the junior high the story of Marilyn Monroe. But all of us watched the very same thing happen 25 years ago to a very beautiful young woman, and she ended up dead, way too young, used by the media. She became the sex object of the world, and the world ground her into the dust. And she ended up a non-entity, a dear and precious woman. My heart goes out to the type of girl I just mentioned. She's not one. I care about them. I don't say, don't watch those dirty young girls. I don't feel that way at all. Learn to think what's being done with them. And I'm going to tell you, a 12, a 13, a 14, a 15-year-old has the capacity to think. But I'll tell you, the society they live in, the school you go to, doesn't think you've got the brain to teach you how to think. In the eyes of the society, you are at most a potential commercial item. We'll sell you jeans and Slurpees. And And God says that He loves you, has great purpose for you. And teaching the kids values, knowing how to think. That's the main thing I want to deal with in the next part of this, which will be soon. I'll try and get it scheduled soon. It takes too long to explain to you why I can't promise it immediately. But confess to your child, I didn't help you think. Will you be patient with me and let's try and learn together? I will elaborate those points, and that's just the first 2 of 4 that are the answers to if the problems have been neglected too long. Then we've got 2 more of the 5 points of problems, media exposure and when puberty approaches, that we'll deal with. But you're so gracious and patient with the extended sessions we've had. And of course, I really didn't speak as long tonight as other nights. It's just that we were much longer getting to the time for it. Thank you for your patience. I hope that everybody in this congregation knows that this pastor loves the families of this church very, very much. And there's nothing that's more important to me than that we teach our children how to live and how to think. How to live and think purely, not because pure is just Puritan, but because pure is fulfilling and pure is eternal. And they're going to have a joyous life through all their childhood and teenage years, and then they're going to get married and have marriages at work. Sexually fulfilling marriages because they didn't get messed up and bombed out. Jesus does redeemed where there's been the mess-ups and bombed out, but a lot of you have been through that. And you know that you would much rather it had been on other terms. And while Jesus can redeem, it's so much better to see how Jesus can keep. Do you agree to that? Amen. He can keep so that redemption doesn't have to happen in areas that have been destroyed and have to be rebuilt so slowly. Well, Lord, I ask by your Holy Spirit that you seal the word again to hearts. Lord, surmount the limitations of communication, and by your Holy Spirit, engender something rich in every heart. Teach us how to teach our kids. In Jesus' name, we submit ourselves to you with prayer and praise. Amen. Let's sing, shall we, together while the brethren come and we give. Let's sing, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice